give you a sense of what the evening is going to be like here. Initially, we're going to have a short welcome and introductions from myself and Liam. Then we'll hear Paddy present about natural regeneration. So we ask you to stay mute during that, and Paddy will be in flow. We will be taking your questions in the chat window during that. I'll be compiling them, and then when Paddy is finished with his presentation, we'll put up a whiteboard at the screen and we'll go through all your questions at that point. So we'll leave plenty of time for that. So that'll be really interesting. We can turn on the microphones at that point as well if you'd like to speak. We don't want to silence you, we just want to give Paddy a chance to present without any distractions. So questions, Q&A will happen then, but questions, as you're thinking of them in the chat box, and then at the end, you can certainly speak at that point. And then we'll come to a close. We'll aim to finish up by 9 o'clock. So maybe the next slide, if you wouldn't mind, please, Paddy. Just to say who I am, we start from the bottom here. My name is Anna Brown. I'm a ProSilva Ireland member. I own a woodland and I practice CCF. I'm also just helping out here tonight from the tech end of things, because that's my background. I'm an IT person since sometime in the last century. But handing over now to Liam to do the presentation on the event, the introduction.
Okay, Corrib Mata, good Anna August Falchariv Galer. Thank you, Anna. As chairperson of ProSilva Ireland, I would like to welcome you all to our second webinar. These are prolonged, challenging times for all of society, and we're very mindful of those who are directly affected by COVID-19. But throughout this pandemic, there continues to be a growing appreciation of forests and nature around us. I would particularly like to welcome our loyal subscribing members. We really miss the opportunities to meet and engage with you at our field events. To those of you who are new to ProSilva Ireland, we also extend a warm welcome. ProSilva Ireland is an all-Ireland organisation that promotes CCF, continuous cover forestry, and the adoption of lower impact silvicultural systems. Continuous cover forestry aims to integrate multiple forest functions while maintaining a permanent forest structure. These functions include protection of soils and water, enhancement of natural habitats and ecosystems, promotion of diversity and resilience, enabling carbon sequestration, and most importantly, all of this while providing an opportunity for the production of quality timber. To quote the pioneering American silviculturist Gifford Pinchot, that trees can be cut and the forest preserved at one and the same time. Continuous cover forestry may also allow for non-timber activities such as food foraging, recreation, tourism, and cultural outcomes. By working closer with both natural processes and measured human interactions, we can enable people working in the forest industry, our local communities, and the wider society to reconnect with our forests. Ultimately, the ProSilva principles support forests which are both ecologically and economically sustainable. ProSilva Ireland is a not-for-profit voluntary organisation founded in 2000 and is part of a wider international network of ProSilva organisations across 27 member countries. We enjoy a diverse and dynamic membership of foresters, forest owners, contractors, ecologists, wood engineers, scientists, artists, and many others. The business of ProSilva is carried out by a committee of 15 volunteers who are representative of the membership. General activities include field days, international study tours, training, publications, and engagement with forestry and other relevant groups, both statutory and non-statutory. I believe that it is the international dimension of ProSilva that makes us unique, being able to share vast experiences through international collaborations, study tours, visiting guests, and the sharing of publications and training tools. We are delighted to be dedicating this evening's webinar to natural regeneration, as it is a key component of CCF. Most often, the progresses and potential of CCF is measured by a forest's ability to regenerate naturally. It is fantastic that Paddy is sharing his wide-ranging experiences with us this evening. Paddy is a forester well known to many with vast expertise in the application of CCF practices. A past chair and founding member of ProSilva Ireland, he works as a forest manager and has acted as a consultant to many significant CCF projects. So now I'd like to hand you over to Paddy and let's enjoy his stimulating presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Liam, and thanks, Anna, for your kind introduction. And good evening, everybody. As Liam said, ProSilva was founded 21 years ago in the year 2000. And it's very clear in my memory, when we started out back then, one of the first field days we had was in County Wicklow at a private forest called Clora. And I remember very clearly after a meeting in one of the rooms in the house, we were out in the field and we were crawling around on our hands and knees looking for regeneration. And we couldn't find any. There was absolutely nothing to be found. And we made lots of excuses for it. We said it was too dry, being the East Coast. It was maybe some parts of the forest was too wet. It was too dark. We hadn't thinned the forest enough. There were too many deer. Lots and lots of excuses. But in fact, the real answer was we were just too inexperienced. And it's amazing now to think 21 years later, Clora is one of the flagship CCF forests in Ireland. And you're going to see some pictures of it during this presentation. So that was our start, or our introduction, or the beginning of our journey, if you want to call it that, into CCF. And I know many people here tonight are probably just at the start of that journey now. So I think the message is take heart, be patient. Regeneration will happen, it does happen. And I'm here to maybe shorten that journey for you, to help it not take you 21 years, but maybe a little quicker. So the presentation is quite a short one, and it's drawn from my own experience and my own observations. It's not based on peer-reviewed scientific papers or literature or anything like that. It's simply based on my own observations and shared experience within ProSilva Ireland and ProSilva Europe. And I'm very grateful to all my colleagues for that. So I'm going to initially talk a little bit about the benefits of natural regeneration. We're going to try and understand some of the influencing factors around regeneration, what conditions we need for regeneration to happen. We're going to look at some of the management interventions that we can take to induce regeneration or to respond to regeneration. Then we're going to look at what happens if we've done all those things and we're still getting no regeneration. What actions do we take, or what should we do? And sometimes we get too much regeneration. What happens then? What can we do about that? Or is there anything we can do about that? And I'm just going to look at the end, or towards the end, at a few just simple examples or case studies, if you like, again, from my own experience and sites that I know or manage. And we brought a brief summary, but I hope, as I said, it's going to be quite a short presentation, which will leave us plenty of time for questions at the end. Okay, so I said we'd start out by just looking at some of the benefits of natural regeneration. And the first one, and the most obvious one, is that it's free. If you go to a nursery and you pay somebody to plant the nursery trees, it costs between €370 and €650 per thousand to buy and plant those trees. So in CCF management, we can get all that for free if we play our cards right. The second benefit, if you like, is regeneration offers itself time and time again. And this is a huge benefit to structure, which is a really important aspect to CCF management. So it's not practical to go out and plant a bit more of your forest every year. Natural regeneration actually does that for us. But imagine the cost if we decided we were going to organize trees every year and plant them every year to underplant a forest. So there's huge benefits that we get it for free, and it comes and comes again. Thirdly, we hear a lot these days about the right tree in the right place, but successful regeneration tends to be better sited with a more balanced root architecture than planted trees, and therefore it ends up as a more stable tree cover. And when we talk about the tree in the right place, at least with natural regeneration, we're not worried about the right place, because trees will site themselves perfectly. And if they're not in the right place, if the seed lands in the wrong place, it won't survive. It won't germinate. It won't survive. So there are exceptions to this, obviously, when one thinks about the legacy issues around the wild growing lodgepole pine on modified blanket peats in the west of Ireland and some of our uplands. But in general, particularly with native species, regeneration tends to find itself in the right place. The fourth thing is that seeds travel far and wide. So even though our forests mightn't be particularly diverse at the moment, there are trees in the landscape which are able to seed in, and we're going to learn a bit about that shortly. So just because we don't have all the species that are suited or that we need or want for our CCF forest on our particular site, it doesn't mean that regeneration or diverse regeneration isn't going to happen. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the influencing factors around natural regeneration. And the first thing is to understand a little bit about species and the different characteristics of species. So we have a kind of a spectrum amongst species in terms of their ability to grow in different types of light or different degrees of light. So we have light demanding species such as birch, spruce, and oak. And we've got shade tolerant species such as beech or cedar or hazel. And then somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, you've got a whole range of other species. Douglas fir is one that springs to mind. Sycamore is another. That are neither light demanding or shade tolerant, but they grow somewhere in the middle of that range. And the other thing we have to understand is the ability of some species to sit in what we call the waiting room. The waiting room is maybe a term we're used to seeing on Zoom, and a lot of people sat in the waiting room earlier this evening. But this is a completely different concept for which applies to silviculture. And most non-pioneering species are shade tolerant at germination stage. In other words, they can germinate in relative, well, not darkness, but they can germinate without a lot of light. And they can survive for periods, some quite long periods in a non-growth state, waiting for an opportunity to arise. Now, pioneer species, such as birch, they're light demanding, and they have very limited ability to sit in a waiting room for long. But they can actually germinate in quite dark conditions, but they need to be released into light quite quickly afterwards. So these kind of things you need to know, or it's good to have a knowledge of. The other influencing factors then are relating to seed dispersal strategies. And different tree species have different strategies that they use. The wind is probably the most well-known or the most commonly cited dispersal strategies that a lot of trees use. For example, birch and spruce and pine, we often see in sunlight, we often see clouds of seed spreading or flying down through the forest and even out of the forest. And some seeds have even developed little wings to assist with this. One thinks of sycamore, which is the most obvious one. And lighter seed from pioneers travels further because it's lighter than heavier seed from climax species. And so that is that's a characteristic, obviously, of pioneer species. They can travel further, faster. Birch seed, for example, can travel up to 2 kilometers on the wind. And the taller the tree, the further the potential for wind dispersal, obviously, as well. The next method that trees use in terms of dispersing seed is through a bird's gut. So this tends to be through trees that produce berries, such as holly or rowan. They produce fruits. Cherry is another example. And the fruit passes through the bird's gut, it digests a lot of the fleshy material, and the seed gets deposited in the feces. And that can be dropped anywhere. It can be dropped in a neighboring forest. So again, coming back to the point about having a non-diverse forest which you're trying to convert, birds will do a lot of the work for you. Birds and animals also carry seed around. We think of squirrels that store nuts, mice that store nuts. The iconic species the jay, we all know the story of the jay, can plant thousands of acorns in one autumn, and up to 5 at a time in its gullet. Water is also a vector for seed. Alder is a classic example that travels on water. In fact, alder in its seed has a little pocket of air, which means it can float and travels downstream. So we often see in a flood zone on a stream or a river, at the edge of the flood zone, you might see a line of alder. And that's simply the high tide mark, if you like, where the alder has been washed to the edge of the flood zone. And the seed sits there, rests there, and germinates. And you see these little lines or banks of alder. That's simply, that's part of the alder strategy. And they're known as riparian species. Even though it's not relevant here, it's worth mentioning in Ireland, because it's a phenomenon we see on the West Coast, that the sea is a vector for seed as well. And people who beachcomb on their summer holidays or in lockdown in the West Coast of Ireland often pick up in the flotsam and jetsam on the coast. They pick up beans, sea beans and knicker nuts. And these come all the way from West Africa. And they've come down great rivers like the Niger or the Congo or the Gambia. And they've flown down gone in the river down to the sea. They've floated across to the Caribbean, and they've picked up the Gulf Stream and come back twice across the Atlantic and wash up on the west coast of Ireland. So you never know with climate change what podocarps might be growing in Mayo before we know it. But the point here is that natural regeneration is very much wrapped up in the health and strength of biodiversity in general. And that is why in CCF management or close to nature management, it's so important to promote biodiversity through identification and retention of microhabitats in the forest. These would be microhabitats like standing and fallen deadwood, rot holes, veteran trees, old stone walls, etc. And it's hugely important that we protect these. We'll identify them first and protect these, because these are all wrapped up in the forest's ability to regenerate. It's also hugely important to protect the forest soil and to promote diversity of species and structure. Because it's all very well having all these seed sources, but if the soil isn't in a position to receive seed, then it's not going to work. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about conditions for regeneration. And I'm going to start with ground conditions. So we talked a little bit in the seed dispersal section about lighter seeds from pioneers, and birch and most conifers produce quite light seed. And this needs the land or needs to germinate or will only germinate on exposed soil or a mossy medium. And they're unlikely to succeed once there is a developed sward of grass or heavy vegetation. So it will be quite different for heavier seeds, which are more adaptable as they can find their way down through heavier vegetation. Oak is a great example of this, where either it gets planted by a jay through grass, but often it's just the weight of the acorn itself. It's able to find its way down through the grass and then has enough energy to come back up again, to work its way back up through the sward. But you'll never get that with a pioneer species or birch or pine or anything like that, because they just simply don't have enough energy to get back up through the grass. So there's a couple of pictures there which illustrate it quite well. One of them is by Jonathan Spatsy, who's on the webinar tonight, of the birch and sitka spruce to the forest in County Clare. And you can see that lovely mossy, light, nearly exposed forest soil with very fresh regeneration of spruce and birch. And the other picture then of oak coming through quite heavy grass and briar. I suppose people who are new to CCF, light is one of the first conversations they'll get into. And light conditions are extremely important, and knowing what kind of light conditions are necessary for natural regeneration to occur. But in general terms, as rotational forests or even age forests grow, and basal area will increase, and light decreases and the potential for regeneration decreases. So if we want to transform these forests to CCF, we need to thin them and allow more light in. And we all know that thinning increases light levels, and it's often a criticism of spruce, or sitka spruce in particular, that nothing grows underneath them and they're a dark desert. And we hear this time and time again. But actually, these arguments are misfounded. This has got nothing to do with SIC as a species. It's to do with the forest management and the forest management practices, and not the species. Thin Sitka spruce can result in very diverse ground flora. So when people talk about dark Sitka spruce plantations, they're actually talking about the management of that species, not the species itself. But what kind of light? What kind of light and how much? And this is where it gets a little bit more detailed. We need to know the difference between direct light and diffuse light. So direct light is where the sun's rays actually directly reach the forest floor. Now, this can lead to unwanted development of herbaceous and shrubby plants to the detriment of tree seedlings, things like grass and briars. It can also lead to less differentiation amongst the seedlings and a heightened risk of multiple crowns and bad quality trees, forks, etc., without necessarily increasing seedling height. So we often get bushy trees when there's too much direct light. However, direct light is very important, and it is more useful in the post-regeneration or the post-germination stages, particularly for light demanders. The other type of light is diffuse light, or ambient light, often it's called. This is where the sun's rays have been intercepted before reaching the forest floor. This is generally more suitable for germination and the initial stages of regeneration. And we control it, as foresters, we control it by managing the basal area and through irregular thinning. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, more about that shortly. And this helps to create the waiting room that I was talking about earlier. And trees in the waiting room can subsequently be released through further basal area reduction, or in some cases, the provision of direct light. Okay, and apart from light and the ground conditions, seed availability is also a huge factor in whether we're going to have successful natural regeneration or not. So it's all very well getting perfect soil conditions ready or site conditions ready, thinning your forest perfectly to the right light intensities and the right amount of ambient light or diffuse light. But if you've got no seed production, then there's no point. So seed production is a factor of species, first of all. Again, pioneers are different. They produce seed from a very early stage. And other species, then non-pioneers, are more sporadic. It's also a factor of age. Older trees generally produce more seed. And some species don't start regular seed production until they're 25 or 30 years of age, sometimes older. And while pioneers produce seed from very early stages. Older trees also tend to have quite larger crowns. So they just, by virtue of the fact of the crown size, they have greater potential for seed production too. Climate is also a big factor in seed production. And people have heard of the concept of mast years. And mast years are particularly, again, for non-pioneering species, they're particularly relevant. Now, we don't know exactly what causes mast years. We know it's a response to climatic triggers, but we don't know which or what combinations of those there are. Is it whether it's related to temperature or rainfall amounts or harsh summers or availability of spring winds for pollen distribution? We don't know. And the other factor in seed production is stress. Trees which are stressed produce more seed. So after a drought year or heavy thinning sometimes, trees go into a stress mode and they actually produce a lot of seed because they're scared they're running out of time and they want to reproduce quickly. And anyone who's studying the ash dieback situation in Ireland at the moment will have seen that. We have a highly stressed population of ash trees in the country at the moment, particularly after last summer. And you would have noticed, people will notice a massive seed production going on in ash trees at the moment because of the cholera disease. Okay, so what kind of management interventions then are we talking about in order to induce or to encourage natural regeneration? People who know me know that this presentation wasn't going to pass without talking about deer populations and the unsustainability of deer populations as they are in some counties. So the culling of deer to reduce deer densities is probably the single most important management intervention in areas where there are deer. And that's unfortunately most parts of the country at the moment. We need to be disciplined with regard to irregular thinning practice. So I talked about that earlier, irregular thinning practice, but what is irregular thinning? Irregular thinning involves the thinning of trees from the stand to reduce basal area and to increase light, but it's done in an irregular fashion. And generally it involves marking trees to promote diversity and quality trees, regardless of their size. So the result is a larger stem size distribution than would be seen in conventionally managed forest. We keep a lot of smaller trees and larger trees alike. And we end up with irregular spacing between trees and groups of trees. The third factor to observe is patience. And we need to be patient, and I'm often guilty of impatience, but we need to be patient. We need to be patient for way longer than we are comfortable being patient. Natural regeneration does happen. It will come. Forests will naturally want to regenerate themselves. They're not going to revert to being fields. They're going to stay as forests. So we need to be confident that this will happen. And all we need to do is kind of guide them along the way a bit. What we don't do is we don't cut big holes to induce regeneration. We don't panic. I've done this, I've panicked, and we've cut holes, try and get regeneration. What happens is we get result is of direct light, the direct sunlight, and we lose control to briars and other heavy vegetation. So instead, we're better off to be guided by advanced regeneration. So small amounts of advanced regeneration that's coming, and we work around that, we try and promote that. It's advanced regeneration is a bit like the waiting room. So we see stuff in the waiting room and said, right, that's in the bank. And we can respond to that then. And that would be regardless of species or quality. And whatever the regeneration is, it will often nurse other species. And I've seen that time and time again. You start to get one species regenerating, very quickly you get 2 or 3 more. Okay, so more management interventions. Again, coming back to the deer, we can use fencing as a, where we know that deer is a constraint. And if we can't get on top of it from a hunting perspective, we can use deer fencing. Or if there's other browsers present, we can use other types of fencing to exclude deer or farm stock. There's a photo showing the very clear difference inside and outside a deer fence as part of a project in the Kerry Life project in County Kerry. Sometimes we get regeneration, but it's dominated by one single species, and we need to intervene with some tending to save any diversity present. And once regeneration has come, don't forget you have to keep thinning to avoid suppressing what has been achieved. So again, I can put my hand up. I've been guilty of this, where we've been delighted to see regeneration coming and sat back to watch it grow, forgetting that it's not going to grow unless we keep thinning the wood. So staying on top of our silviculture, if you like, or staying on top of our basal area management, our irregular thinning is a huge part of the progression of regeneration from germination to seedling to thicket and up to pole stage trees. Enrichment planting is also another important factor. We use it a lot. We use it to diversify regeneration that's happening naturally. We use it sometimes where we're getting impatient and we want to achieve something. And then I talked earlier about soil and soil protection. We really have to be disciplined about machinery. Machinery should be restricted to machine paths to avoid compaction. Now, there's nothing wrong with using machines in harvesting in the wood or for other operations in the wood, but we have to be disciplined that they're not driving all over the place. And it's really noticeable, and we talked earlier about grass growth. Anywhere where we use machines or we have had machine paths, we tend to get quite heavy grass growth afterwards where the soil has become compacted, and we lose that nice soil structure, and grass is one of the only things that will grow, and that becomes an inhibitor to regeneration. Scarification is also used as a management intervention. I personally haven't used it, but it's commonly used amongst CCF practitioners. So what happens what do we do if no regeneration comes? Well, what are the reasons? Maybe the vegetation has taken over. Maybe the basal area was too low or too regular, and we've got this massive vegetation taken over. Or maybe the opposite. Maybe the basal area is still too high. We haven't thinned enough. There's not enough light getting in. Maybe the stand is too young. It's not producing seeds yet, and our expectations are unrealistic. Or maybe the deer densities are too high. But again, patience is the key here. Got to stay patient. We can use enrichment planting. I tend to do it in groups if possible. That can sometimes trigger regeneration or nurse other regeneration that might come up. And we have to stay on top of irregular thinning. Again, coming back to this, maintaining quality stems, maintaining the stem size distribution, and thinning around quality rather than trying to, I suppose, homogenize the stand. And again, scarification can be a useful intervention if no regeneration has come. But sometimes we get too successful. We get too much regeneration. Sometimes this can be accidental. The canopy may have opened significantly as a result of wind blow, or even fully, sometimes following a clear fell, you can get these massive regeneration events. It can also be because the thinning has been too uniform. So in a classic kind of shelterwood type system, where you have a heavy thinning at the end, kind of a seeding thinning, which is designed to release a massive regeneration like this. But it can be problematic. So what I would suggest is we search for any diversity within the regeneration. Any other species, for example, in the picture with spruce there, if there's a rowan or a birch or a Douglas fir or something else in there, we find it and we single it out, we tend it. So we cut the neighboring spruce trees and give it an opportunity to express itself or to grow up or to get to the next stage. We can use enrichment planting, doing the same thing to diversify it. Again, in groups, because it's more sustainable or more easy to maintain in groups. And again, patience, because even if you don't do any intervention, self-thinning and differentiation will happen. We should plan for an early first thinning as well. Normally, when you get mass regeneration like that, you're going to have to get in at an early stage to differentiate or to find the quality stems and to release them. So you got this early first thinning or tending operation, and you probably need to consider using a simple shelterwood system in transforming to CCF. So you may not be able to generate a complex structure after getting a mass regeneration event like that. Okay, so I'm just going to run through a few slides of just little simple examples of regeneration as I've come across it. This is a small private forest near Aughrim, County Wicklow, where the owner is very interested in CCF, and it's very high local deer population. And the owner installed these small, approximately 10 meter by 10 meter exclosures. Now, they're not deer fence height, they're just simple exclosures where the deer they're so small that the deer don't like going into them because they feel trapped inside them. And these have been very effective at achieving regeneration at a small scale. But if you put a number of these through the wood, and this kind of thing is funded under the Forest Service CCF grant scheme, it can be very effective. This is back in Clora, private forest, where we've done some enrichment planting in a CCF grant-aided area, and where we've done that enrichment planting, or we find other naturally regenerating species that are in trouble with the deer, we can put in small exclosures like this to protect them. Now, this kind of work is also covered under the Forest Service CCF scheme, and it's quite useful for small things like this. This is an example of Knockrath Forest, also County Wicklow. We've got prolific regeneration of oak at seedling and again at thicket stage in the two pictures. And so you can see in the second picture at thicket stage, you've got this differentiation of stem sizes starting to happen naturally. It's only beginning to start. But it will happen better in irregular structures where we have an overstory and an irregularly managed overstory. But where it's not happening, it's quite easy at that stage to go in and find the quality stems and to do some low-cost interventions that can be made to promote quality or diversity. And I would say at that stage, you'll be able to identify without any difficulty where the quality, what the quality stems are. And of course, diversity is diversity. And if it's there, you should definitely promote it. Did I skip a slide there? No, I didn't. So the next example, this is a familiar scene in the overstory. It's a badly diseased Clara ash plantation, which we've underplanted with beech. This is in County Leitrim, and it's a failing first-generation forest with the ash dieback disease. So right at the start of the ash dieback story, we decided to get in there and underplant it with beech. And you can see the beech has actually had a very successful time. It was going to be too expensive to, well, the cost of harvesting it, cost of harvesting the ash was going to be greater than the recoverable value from the timber. So we decided to leave it, let it die on its feet, and underplant with beech. And the beech has really benefited from this nice shelter and structure that it's able to grow up through. Now, it's very difficult to walk through that now with the briars and everything, but the beech are ahead of it, and it's doing very nicely at the moment. This is another example. This is on many of our forests, particularly the old woodland sites, and I know a lot of the quilcher forests would be quilcher forests on old woodland sites have problems with invasive species like laurel or rhododendron. And really, control of those species needs to be dealt with first before expecting to have any successful regeneration. But it does actually provide a great opportunity, having done that work, because underneath the rhododendron, underneath the laurel, you get this lovely bare medium, which is fresh and available for germination of fresh seed on the newly exposed forest floor. So you can see, I've highlighted them there. You can see this, this is immediately after controlling a very extensive laurel problem. And you see this beech regeneration jumping out, ready to go. You can nearly hear them shouting yippee. Okay, and another example here, this is in Curramore Forest in County Waterford. It's a private forest there, an old woodland site. It's an old Douglas fir Norway spruce plantation on old woodland. You can see it's nearly, it's a long way along the ways to conversion back to native woodland. And it's very difficult to naturally regenerate conifers or on sites that are more suited to broadleaves. And this means that over time, many such sites will revert to being broadleaf sites. And fighting this generally involves expensive underplanting and maintenance. And in my experience, it's not worth it, because you struggle, you spend money, and you're just fighting nature, and you're better off to embrace it. And you get amazing production of native species on these sites. So those are a few examples. So just in summary, the 6 things I suppose I could summarize advice in terms of natural regeneration. The first is to be patient. And I'm the most guilty of being the most impatient. But you learn to be patient with natural regeneration. It does come. And it's really, you have to be disciplined about that. The second is, obviously, we need to thin, and thinning involves reducing the basal area. But it's how we thin. And how we thin influences the type of light we get. We want to get diffuse light or ambient light, which is better for achieving regeneration. And we want the thinning to be irregular, which is a better structure for regeneration to actually come up through. So those 3, reducing the basal area, using diffuse light, and irregular thinning. They're all connected, very much so. We need to control the deer, and we need to promote diversity whenever we find it. So that's all I was going to have in the presentation, but I'm really look forward to answering questions and engaging on whatever questions come up. I'm going to hand you back to Anna now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Paddy. Well, I think everybody's just been enthralled by your presentation. There's no questions yet in the chat window. There's a few things that struck me. Maybe I'll just kick them off and let people either turn on their mics or put them in the chat window. You mentioned something called a simple shelter wood structure. I wasn't clear what that was, Paddy. Is that something that you could, did I miss here, or is that something that's a thing? That's
a thing. So a simple shelter wood is literally where you regenerate the forest in one go, effectively. So you actually end up having a two-aged forest. You have an overstory, which you've thinned very heavily, and that releases in one event or over a very short period of time another generation of trees which come up. And once that's successfully there, you remove the remains of the overstory and the next generation comes up. So it's a very simple structure. It's two-tiered and it's very different to the complex multi-canopied structure which we all dream of in I suppose a more complex continuous cover system. Okay, very good. Thank you for that. Now we had a question here, but it may have been answered already. So Declan O'Byrne wants to know, is it possible to avoid rhododendron and mountain laurel coming back other than manually going in? Yeah, I should have said, once you've done your work on rhododendron and laurel, that's you've 3 or 4 more years minimum of going back and controlling. So that can be done either by pulling the fresh regeneration but also respraying stumps. We do it chemically, respraying the stumps of the plants, the rhododendron and laurel that you have cut previously. But it is possible to get on top of it eventually. Okay, very good. So I'm going to just start taking questions up here on a whiteboard. It might make it a bit easier. There's quite a few coming in now. So I'm going to start a whiteboard here and see if I can find these. Sorry now. So it's a bit bigger. Okay, so let me just stick this up here. And I can add more then as you're answering this one, if that's okay. Sure. Can you see that, Paddy? Sure, yeah. So that example, that's an owner in County Wicklow. The 10 by 10 meter plots. They're simply hand-driven stakes with a simple sheep wire around, no barbed wire. It was just simple sheep wire at normal stock height. The fence doesn't even need to be strained because it's such it's only 10 meters by 10 meters, and because it's so small, the deer just don't like going into those kind of small exclosures or small enclosures. So they would go in if they were forced, but they don't like going in, and so the trees have a better chance. That basically you're at a very local level, you're reducing deer densities significantly, which allows the regeneration to get up and to get away. Great stuff. Thank you. What's the best way to encourage regeneration on greenfield sites? That's a very good question. I'm not sure I'm the expert on that by any means. Most of the work I do is in relation to regeneration within woods. But to encourage regeneration on greenfield sites, I think the first thing you do is you reduce the grazing pressure significantly. So whether that's taking stock off the land, not entirely now, because a certain amount of grazing is important, but you need to reduce, and I can't say to what densities. Certainly if there's deer population, you need to reduce that significantly. You can do some scarification. It helps if you've got trees in the landscape. You can introduce seed, you can sow seed, but I wouldn't do it unless I had prepared a site beforehand. And patience, because again, you will get colonization. If you reduce grazing, you will get colonization. And all you need is patience for that.
Okay.
Next question there, is all thinning and harvesting carried out by chainsaw rather than harvester? How do you extract without causing? No, most of the CCF work we do is carried out using mechanized harvester and forwarder. But what we must do is we must be disciplined about where those machines travel in the wood. So what we do is we dedicate paths or access routes in the wood to the machinery. And we accept that on those machine paths, we're not going to get regeneration, but it does allow us to generate an income to harvest timber from the wood and generate an income. But that's part of the seen as part of the infrastructure rather than as part of the, I suppose, the forest itself. And we don't expect to get regeneration of those, but we are very disciplined about saying machines should not stray from those machine paths.
Great, thank you. And sorry for getting rid of all the
That's
stuff
okay.
there. Had to read.
Did I miss a couple of questions?
I put back the ones as far as you've got. So there's a new batch here now, if you don't mind.
Okay. I mentioned not cutting holes in the forest. Do you mean small? Yeah, I do actually. It's okay to cut coops where you have advanced regeneration, where the regeneration is already in place in the waiting room, if you like. But to cut the holes in the hope that you're going to achieve regeneration, it's the wrong way around. And maybe you'll be lucky, maybe you'll achieve it, but my experience is that you're more likely to fill the hole with briars and with grass than you are with regenerating trees. So I would be very careful about that. I'd be quite happy to cut coops when I have regeneration in place. And coops are necessary for some species like oak, you know, that they would have sufficient light. For the light demanding species, they would have sufficient light to get out of the waiting room and on to the next phase. But it's not a good idea to do it in the absence of any regeneration as a way of achieving regeneration. It's a response to regeneration. Is there a guide on first thin age in relation to spruce with a specific yield class? There isn't a guide as such, but what I would say is, and this is moving away from the topic of natural regeneration, but I would, your first thin age should be as soon as is economically achievable, and not when a contractor tells you that you're going to get pallet wood or a more valuable harvest. As I would say, the optimum time to start your conversion, if you are dealing with a monoculture of Sitka spruce, is when it's just at or better than a break-even situation in terms of the timber harvest paying for the harvest cost. It's not too late if you do it later, but the optimal time is as early as possible.
Great, that's very clear.
There are many young monoculture Sitka spruce plantations. What is the optimum age to start? I think that's the same answer again, isn't it? The same question again, more or less.
Yeah.
Do you find in some species it takes a long time for the tree to start to seed? Yes. I mean, you will get seeding in some species, like Norway spruce at age 25, 30, but it's not reliable. It's not reliable until later on. So even Sitka spruce, I wouldn't say seed production is reliable until age 30. Now you do get coning and you do get seed production before that, but you get that at an individual tree level rather than at a stand level. it's unlikely that you'll get significant regeneration in any spruce wood before the age of 25, and probably less unlikely you get it significantly before the age of 35, to be honest.
Okay, I'm going to clear these so I can have a new batch. Questions are still coming in, which is great. Thanks everybody for the contributions on that. Okay, there's 2 more questions there and more to follow. So if you want to go with those.
I might just say if Liam feels he can answer any of these questions better, jump in, Liam, because I'm sure you've a lot to say on them.
You're doing fine, Paddy. You're doing fine.
What's the benefit of promoting understory complementary species, beech at planting stage or later, to help control? I'm not sure promoting the benefit of promoting diversity. I'm not quite sure I get the question. Promoting understory complementary species at plant stage or later.
Jonathan Spazia might turn off his mic and clarify there. Yeah.
Hi, Paddy. It's just a growing problem with briars and managing briars in natural regeneration. And it occurred to me that if the original planting had in it an understory element, that would probably help. But I wonder if you come across such plantings.
I understand your question now. That's an extremely good point. And at the moment, we're not under the grant and premium categories or scheme. We don't have an ideal CCF design, kind of grow your forests from the start as a CCF forest. And I would like to see more mixture like that, which allows complementary species, shade tolerant, light demanding species grown together, and in particular timber species that mature at different stages. So species like and mixtures of native species with more commercial species. So you'd have short-term income generating species followed by medium-term income generating species followed by long-term income generating species. So one thinks of maybe Sitka spruce in the short term, Douglas fir in the medium term, for example, Norway spruce in the medium term, and oak in the long term. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be planting all of these species together with a proper planting design.
So I'm just going to jump in here because we have 3 minutes to go. Are people happy enough to carry on with the Q&A a little bit over time? You happy enough, Liam and Paddy, to keep going? Because there's quite a few questions still coming through.
No problem.
People aren't happy. They feel free to leave, but we'd like to keep going.
I think if people can leave by choice, Anna. But we thank them for their participation if we leave them before the end, and we understand that they'd only committed the 60 minutes, but we can give another few minutes.
Right, and there's messages coming in to me to keep going, so let's keep going. That's great.
Liam, I'm gonna let you, because as a forestry contractor, harvesting contractor, I'm gonna let you answer the next question there. And obviously you're going to say no. The only contractors who sufficiently skilled is myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
No,
I have to say, take my own experience, our own experience. We came to CCF because our clients wanted CCF practice. So we had to learn. We had to learn in the forest floor. There wasn't a manual. There wasn't something we did or we didn't do. Basically, we took the best instruction we could from the clients, from the foresters, and also we had the fantastic shared experience of engaging with ProSilva and ProSilva activities. But I would say contractors who are good at applying themselves to, if you want to call it regular harvesting work, will find it very easy to adapt to CCF. To CCF harvesting. It's just about tree choice, about things that are different. It's very often marked. A lot of this work is done in consultation with the with the managing foresters and the owners. So I'd say contractors who are good at disciplined, at regular contract work, have no problem making the transition to CCF harvesting. And currently there are many very good contractors working throughout the country, and they will be a growing number because there is a growing demand for it. And contractors are just like any other commercial entity. They're very often family businesses trying to sustain themselves, and they will avail of providing CCF services because it's a commercial opportunity, and rightly so. So I think that's a thing. It's the chicken and egg situation. As there is a demand, people will upskill and deliver.
Liam, is it worth mentioning ProSilva's training courses here?
Absolutely, definitely. We have the tree, and when we talk about training courses, I go to simply our field days, meeting in the forest, discussing forest management. That's very starting, and what a great place, and to meet people and to engage. Then we have the tree marker course that has been devised by Ted Wilson, that's developed at your own forest in Kilteal, Anna, and that has been very successful. We're unable to deliver that due to COVID, and there are many other initiatives that we're collaborating with Teagasc, and currently there is a national steering group being convened on CCF training that is going to develop more training, identifying the opportunities and coming up with the solutions for training. So that's an ongoing issue. And training and education, as I say, we think of training, we think of education in a formal capacity, but very often it's reading publications, attending field days. And I'll say the best way for people to train themselves is actually by practicing, whether it's managing forests or carrying out harvesting. That's the best way. Let's start with the best information possible and the best guidance possible, but start practicing.
Great.
Okay, thanks, Liam. I'm going to jump in with the next answer there. Is manual seed dispersal worthwhile? We have done it. It can be very rewarding, but it's hit and miss. It can be an expensive mistake as well. So it's a difficult one to recommend. This particular set of circumstances, which I think it does work, where the timing is right, and I would consult with a nursery that provides the seed, or with a nursery manual, if nothing else, as to the optimal time for seeding of different species, because and then the soil conditions that are necessary, because it's very much tied into nursery practice in a way, even though you're doing it at a forest level. But it is something that is you could consider. And as we did it in the Kerry Life project extremely successfully on one site, and I think it definitely has merit. Not in every situation, but it has merit. On an even age sand, secure Norway trees of uniform mass with soils and tree height, what age is your? That is probably not an answerable question, because we don't work in terms of age. First of all, CCF age goes out the window. So we don't talk about the age of forests. We talk about the stage of forests. So what you need to do in that instance is to keep thinning irregularly, keep trying to promote quality in the wood, and the seed will choose its own time. So your job as a forester or a forest owner or a contractor is to create the conditions for the regeneration, and to sit back and be patient. And we don't define it by age. So create the conditions and the regeneration will follow. If you're in a pure spruce stand with very little other diverse seed soils, could you use the holes for enrichment planting before the briars get hold, say? Yes, that is, you could do that. It's expensive, and I suppose with the life in the private sector, we try and avoid spending money where we can. But you could decide to do a considerable bit of enrichment planting and promote that by cutting coops. But there is a danger in a pure spruce stand that you're opening it up to the wind significantly, and you're going to then that's going to result in pockets of wind blow or further pockets of blow. So just be careful. I would say be very careful. What's the latest age you would consider CCF in Norway or Sitka spruce? That's, again, age isn't a factor there. It's based on the yield class and the stage of development. So I wouldn't refer to an age. Normally, if it's too late to thin, then it's too late, obviously, for CCF.
Yeah.
So thinning, if the thinning is going to result in, or there's a high risk of wind throw associated with it, then you're probably in a situation where you need to redesign the forest from scratch. Now, there are people and there are situations where people are converting to CCF at a very late stage and on unstable sites, and they are aware of the risks involved. And I'm not saying it can't be done, but it's a high-risk strategy. So it's very difficult to advise it. But if you advise on the risk that's involved, that the forest may blow down and use it, that can be seen as a disturbance or natural disturbance, and harvest the wind-blown timber and use that as a disturbance for regenerating the forest or diversifying the forest. That's fine. You're probably going to go through quite a messy stage, but it's possible to do it. How can members of the public best encourage lobby the state to shift to CCF on current sites bound for clearfell? That's nothing to do with natural regeneration. That's a political question. I'm not sure I can answer that. I think show an interest. Learn up about it, talk to your local forestry community, discuss it, be positive about it. Lobbying, it's easy to lobby for something without understanding it. I think you first need to understand it. For example, I referred earlier in the talk to the question of species versus management, and Sitka spruce gets an awful bad press when it's actually the management which is at issue rather than the species. So learn about what's involved in CCF, go to CCF field days, mix with the CCF community, and use that knowledge to promote it in your own communities, through your own networks, etc. But again, I'm a technical forester, not a politician, so I don't really know how to answer that. Anna, you'd be way better at that than me.
I mean, I think talk to your, like, if you know about it and you talk to your county councillors or when they come to the door, you know, I also have a list inside my door of things I want to bend their ear about. So this would be added to the list. And the more people talk about it, the more they're going to hear. I think it's you know, it's a grassroots kind of critical mass type of thing.
Yeah.
Maybe here's a better question for you, Paddy. Is there a minimum area of plantation below which adopting CCF would not be practical?
Well, we had on our committee, we've an ongoing argument between two members of our committee as to who has the smallest CCF forest in Ireland, and they know who they are, and both forests are less than 1 hectare, I think. So I don't think there's a minimum area, but there is obviously economics around economies of scale, and you can manage a CCF forest on a very small area, but you need to be able to be prepared to do a lot of the work yourself. Otherwise, it can be quite expensive to get people in to do a professional job in a very small area.
Okay, so what's coming in now are comments, which are lovely to see, but I'm not going to read them out. There was a very long comment from Ted previously, but I think people can look at the chat and see that themselves. I think we could wrap it up at this point. Liam, what do you think? Do you have some words to say?
No, I would just like to say, because the whole thing there, I say there's a lot of comment there regarding contractors and the whole thing, and it's probably a webinar in itself. And I would just like to say all contractors work most comfortably when they're working closely with a managing forester and an engaged owner. And it's been a comment there, I think we spoke about in our previous webinar, the value of marking stands, and stands being marked, so it takes away from the anxiety of the tree choice away from the contractor. And I think that's Jonathan and Manus have been talking about that, and I think that's been a very important point. And those decisions and that marking can be done in conjunction with the contractor, and particularly at early stage interventions when it comes to machine access and rack layout. But it's about partnership, and it's about sharing the responsibility. And I think when that responsibility is shared with contractors, with managers, with owners, with all involved, you get the best results. So it is. So that it's just a comment on the, as I say, the whole thing regarding contracting and marking and extraction. I think it's a webinar in itself, but I would agree completely with the lad's comment. And marking makes us all conscious of the decisions and the reasons why and tree choices, and it actually empowers contractors to concentrate on the harvesting, on the sensitive harvesting of those trees, and takes that anxiety away from them. The other thing, when we were talking about training there, I referred to Teagasc, and Jonathan Spatsy, prominent ProSilva member, has done fantastic work delivering innovative training at Corrigh Chase in conjunction with Cuija and ProSilva. And he has delivered COVID-friendly training online as well. And I know Teagasc and Jonathan will be continue to innovate CCF training as well.
Okay,
So
that's it for tonight then?
Yeah, I think that's it, Anna. I'd just like to finish up by thanking Paddy for, I think, what he's in sharing his incredible experiences. I think he's delivered a fantastic presentation and sharing all his insights and knowledge with us. I think the one thing I'd have to agree with him above all else is he mentions patience, and I'd say patience again. So it is, because it's all about harnessing the power of nature. It's great to see continued growth and interest in the whole area of CCF and the application of closer to nature practices. So it is, and I'd say many of us have gained our knowledge today, as I mentioned earlier, is through ProSilva. So if you're not already a member and you're interested in joining, just please, I encourage you to look us up on prosilvaireland.com. Finally, speaking as someone who's definitely more comfortable in the forest, facilitating the delivery of timber rather than facilitating the delivery of a webinar, I thank you, Anna, for your expert inputs into tonight and making it possible and facilitating this evening's events. Anna is a loyal ProSilva member, and with her, together with her husband Brian, are CCF practitioners at their own forest in Kildare, County Kildare. So Anna, I'd like to thank you very much, along with Paddy. So I think nothing left for me to say, only thank you all for your attention. Stay safe. We all look forward to meeting in the forest soon again. So from me, Slán Abhaile, agus go raibh míle maith agat.